Uh, okay, one moment. One moment.
Now,
Okay, let's try that one more time. Can you hear me now?
now I can hear you.
Okay, I love technology. Good morning from California, and good afternoon to Stefan in Germany.
Hello, Steve.
How are
We
you?
have already afternoon, yeah. I'm
Yes,
fine. I finished my work today, and now we can talk about Business Central, I believe.
excellent. Excellent. I'm just making sure all the technical plumbing in the back end here is working okay. Let me just double check audio, but okay, I think we are sounding good. So let me switch over to the to this PowerPoint slide here, if I can. And um, where is it? We were going to talk about just a couple random topics about life as a Business Central developer. So we had chosen a few arbitrary topics: learning curve, automated test or test driven development, DevOps, best practices, and code review. So, with those topics in mind, um, I guess you may be familiar from my Twitter posts and my YouTube videos about me, being new to Business Central. So, what has your journey been with Business Central or Nav previously?
Okay, so I started with development in general. I don't know how this is in English, how you can translate this. In German, this is Ausbildung called. So you are learning in school 2 days and 3 days a week in a company. This is for
Ah,
3 years
okay,
and something like this. So this is after I finished my regular school time, I did this.
okay,
It's pretty common in Germany to do this, but this was not related to NAV. So
okay.
I have a background in Python and Django development and connecting to a small German ERP system.
Okay.
But at the end already I touched NAV also, and after that I started to develop in Dynamics NAV.
Cool.
I believe 2016 was the first version I started with. So I'm
Okay.
quite young compared to others.
Right. It has a long history.
Yeah, yeah, it has.
Very
But
cool.
this was CAL at the beginning, so um,
Right.
there I learned the basics and how to develop in general in NAV. And I believe since 2018, not at the very beginning when AL was released, but quite fast afterwards, I started also with AL development.
Very cool. And you mentioned what is the name of the program in Germany where many people do I think we might call it an internship. What is it called in Germany?
Okay. Ausbildung.
Hospital? Like
Ausbildung.
oh,
Yeah,
Ausbetel?
correct.
Ausbetel.
Bildung, like
Oh,
education in German.
Ausbildung. Okay, got it. I
No,
got it. Okay. My
exactly.
my
Yeah,
very rusty German, Ausbildung. Got it. Okay. Yes. And
exactly.
I was mentioning to you that I took a couple years of German in high school, and it was not a productive experience for me. I only know about 10 words. But one of the things that we did learn is the kind of educational paths and the work training or the apprenticeship programs in Germany. The educational system is oriented very differently, and it seems very valuable. So in the US, I think we have less of that practical hands-on training as
Mhm.
part of a educational process. And so it presents some challenges for certain things where you need several years of experience, right? So it sounds like that program you did was very valuable, and that's great. You got to work with NAV.
It is, especially for development. I had a few colleagues in school. These 2 days of school we had in a week,
Hmm.
they already were experienced in development, and the school part for them was quite boring. But for me, with no touch of development before, this was quite valuable because you get the broad a foundation of development in C sharp we did in school.
Okay.
And while in the company you only learn what you need for working normally.
Right.
So this is
Yep.
quite valuable, I think.
And in I took programming classes in college, so I'm using some. I don't even know what the name of the language was. It was some bizarre, obscure educational language that they used to demonstrate principles. And we're programming recursion, right? In this bizarre language I'll never use again. And I don't think I've actually used recursion in the business world because it's not something you typically want to use. It's kind of it can be problematic. So anyway, yes, having the real world business experience, the stuff I learned in the real world is completely different than any of the classes that I learned in school. So I think it's valuable. Well, neat. So, kind of related to that, learning curve was one of the things we had talked about. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I have, let's say, I'm just going to round 20 plus years of experience with IT, technology, software development, software implementation. And despite any fundamentals I may know, despite my understanding of ERP and programming and design and all those things, learning Business Central has been like starting from scratch in so many respects. And I don't know if you've had a similar experience, but just getting familiar with Docker, right? And you have all these fundamentals. You've got Docker, you've got the Business Central application, then you've got AL, and then all these related technologies, DevOps, App Insights, you name it. What was your transition like from the Nav Seaside world to BCAL?
Difficult question. Where to start? um, when I think back in this time, we probably didn't have so much with Docker and everything related stuff.
Okay.
So at the beginning, we had the focus on setting up I think NAV 2018 was really the first version where we were able to develop AL. So this was like a normal installation of NAV like it was before. We just enabled the development endpoint, the port, and started development. But I
Okay.
remember first in this time we had this hybrid solution where we had still had CAL objects and were able to develop in AL. So the main struggle was generating symbol references. I don't know if you
Ah,
ever did this, but this was the absolute main struggle, not comparable to anything I struggle with today.
got it. Interesting. So no, I have not installed or touched any of the I'll call it classic nav versions. I've only been with the worked with the Business Central Docker containers and the
Mm.
latest VS Code and AL, so all the new stuff. So would you say that that transition from that hybrid model from Seaside to the hybrid to AL, do you think that helped you transition or not necessarily?
Yes, it helped, and I think it was not like everything at once, like it would be for anyone starting now. So
Right.
we had a really difficult start with this symbol reference and hybrid and going doing CAL customizations and also AL customizations, and you need to regenerate the symbol references and stuff like that. And then it
Ah,
became easier,
got it.
step by step.
I guess I'm spoiled. I just click on press F1 and click download symbols and magically it works, right?
Yeah, we had
Okay.
problems like there were no symbols, there were the wrong symbols at all, and stuff like that.
Okay. So you did, it sounds like you did have a learning curve. It was just a different one. You had your own challenges coming from that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So nowadays, what do you see as, do you think you still have a learning curve, or what are you challenged with in terms of learning, given where you're at now?
Right now, I think everything related to Docker quite is running for me.
Yeah.
This is no problem, I think, especially with the awesome BC container helper. This
Yes.
tool got really improved lately, I think. Right now, I am working on building pipelines quite a lot. I don't know if you read it on Twitter. I do not do DevOps. I do
Okay.
GitLab in my
GitLab.
company.
Okay.
GitLab. And this tool also has building pipelines similar to DevOps, but different. So I started to rebuild the PowerShell building pipelines Freddy did in his repository.
Wow.
And this is really step-by-step work. For now, it's somehow working, but Voldo posted his blog post on what is possible, and now I think I only scratched what is possible with building pipelines.
Wow. So while many of the I guess standard practices for BCAL DevOps are on Azure DevOps, you have the additional challenge of trying to translate that and recreate all of that in GitLab.
Yeah, this is my current topic.
Wow, that's a pretty significant effort. Is based on what I know of DevOps. That's a pretty significant project.
Yeah, I saw that Freddy did changes to this pipeline stuff
Hmm.
in his scripts. I did not touch that for now. I don't know if this will be easier for me with this comments or not. But yeah, quite a lot of work, quite complicated.
Yes, and I attended the training class by Waldo, where the DevOps class that he had recently, and we walked through the standard DevOps functionality and pipelines and using the PowerShell piece. And I
Hmm.
thought, okay, that's a fair amount of information to digest and figure out how to use. And then he showed us AL ops. And that's when I finally understood it's only once you see the different approach and the different tool set that you see some of the challenges and limitations of using, the basic tool set. And so he showed some of the features, flexibility, and granularity that his AL ops product provides. And it became clear, now I understand why you developed this and why it's a paid product, because it's a lot of work maintaining that. So it's my assumption is you're having to essentially recreate something like AL Ops in GitLab. So that's a pretty big venture. Now, if you tackle that, is that something you're going to try to release to other organizations who may use GitLab?
Difficult question. First of all, this is a set of scripts like Freddy prepared for us
Mm-hmm.
in his Hello World repository for DevOps. I think the LA Ops is an extension for Azure DevOps, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
So this
Yep.
is a little bit different. And second part is that this is something I do in my work time. So I don't know if it will be possible to give
Yeah.
this away. um,
Understood. Yeah, that is a challenge.
the common problem.
Yes, many consultants and developers have developed some great tools, but because they're part of a customer project or a work project, it's not necessarily something that can be easily released. And then you have the maintenance, so it's difficult. Understood. So I guess another element of learning curve that I'm seeing, I mean, my learning curve is huge. I'm still coming up to speed with AL and the objects and understanding Business Central and where the data is and all those things. But another element is the changes in Business Central. Um, a release every 6 months may not sound like too big of a deal, but when you have a day job and you're working at your employer or you're working with clients as a consultant and you're dealing with their projects, a business central release every 6 months that makes meaningful or significant changes to development, it takes time to catch up. I mean, how are you finding some of the
Absolutely.
changes?
Um, Absolutely. This is a topic, especially because Microsoft did not do this 4 years ago. There we had like one
Yeah.
upgrade, one major release every once a year, and I believe even this release has had less of changes
Right.
inside the code base and less features for developers and everything together. This was quite smaller, this steps. So now we are facing this problem, but I think the documentation also got better. So we have the
Got it.
possibilities. Every release is better documented.
Right.
Natalie probably last time did this search in the
Yes.
docs where you can just scroll to every changes which are there and read on them. But
I
they are probably is probably only the changes for developers and some key features of the product. I think there are quite more changes inside the code and the product itself, which are not documented for now.
Yes, and I know that a year or two ago, the BC team uh, declared that they would be done with breaking changes. I don't know if you recall seeing that conversation, but I see this latest release. They made what I think they thought was a small change. They said, "Oh, we're just moving this chunk of code out to its own code unit," something to that effect. And while in theory that change was minor, they thought, "Oh, that's not going to cause any problems. Developers will just go from here to here. It's one change." That was a breaking change. And so I think it was Waldo pointed out, well, that breaks my
Mhm.
code, that breaks my automated testing, that breaks my DevOps pipelines, and I'm going to have to retrofit everything because of this one seemingly small change. So I empathize with the Business Central team, and I totally understand why they're having to make these changes. But it's it's a pretty significant amount of effort for developers to keep up with that, it seems.
It is. This is one of the reasons why I started to work on this BC base app repository. I don't know if you read about this. I had a call with Jesper from Microsoft already. We were talking about this um, and how to make this available to the community. So my plan is to make a GitHub repository, a public one, where I can automatically publish the base app artifacts. So what I did
Huh.
for now, trying to download the get artifact URL, download the artifacts, every version, single version there is, and extract the base app objects and
Okay.
commit them to a repository. So
And
if this is in
this,
place, you can just compare between every single version and see line by line a diff.
so we can now diff every release, see what changed. So, and understandably, the Business Central team can't necessarily document every internal code change they made. And so this will allow anyone to see those changes. Um,
Yeah.
Interesting. Um, so coming from the Dynamics GP world, most people did not even have this option. There were a handful of people who have the source code through a source code program, but it was not publicly available in any standard way. So it sounds like this would make the BC base app source code essentially publicly available.
Not directly because it is already publicly available. You can install the BC container helper and just get the artifact URL and
Right.
you have the code.
Okay.
So this was one of the key topics we talked about. I talked about with Jasper that the code technically is already available.
Mhm.
Just a matter of if this is will be published in context of my user or the user from Microsoft or stuff like that.
Got it. But it sounds like if it is available as a Git repo, it's more accessible. I
Oh
know
yeah,
I have
absolutely.
extracted it on a container once, and if I had to do that again, I would have to go look up the instructions and figure out how to do it. I don't remember. But
Yeah.
if it's on a Git repo, sure, that's easier. I can understand how to do that. So interesting. Very cool. Anything else on learning curve that you think is
Um, Checking up on my notes.
well, one thing that I do. So on Twitter, I see a bunch of activity and I don't have time while I'm scrolling to follow up with everything. So I
Uh-huh.
like I'll see Kenny post about some new app insights telemetry, I forget what it's called, like a telemetry object. And
Hmm.
I will bookmark it. And the problem I'm having is my list of stuff to go back and follow up on and learn was so long. Like I used to maintain it in OneNote, Microsoft OneNote. But then I realized when you get more than 200 or 300 items in OneNote, it doesn't work really well. My list was so long, I was trying to scroll and it was too slow. So I had to extract that out. Not OneNote, To Do. I was using Microsoft To Do. That
Yeah.
stopped working.
To
So I
do.
had to transfer everything to OneNote. And then I was like, oh, well, I'm constantly transferring things. So now I'm just bookmarking in Twitter. And my to do list is so long, like just App Insights, for example. I did a test. I set that up as a test, checked it out, but Kenny is constantly coming out with new telemetry. So that's one thing I want to do. The next topic, automated or acceptance test driven development, DevOps. There's so many things that are going on with Business Central. It's hard to keep up for me.
It is hard, but I'm impressed that you structured your learning to do so well. For me, I did not. I don't have any list where I can read or what I plan to read through. I just, if I see something interesting, I read on this or stuff like that. And um, this is everything I do for keeping up with the speed. I don't know if this is any different if you already see things and read topics and think like, ah, yeah, so this I know already. Scroll through 5 minutes of reading, and you know what's going on. I probably do a lot of learning on demand, so I if I'm in a project and I need to think about something like now I'm still working on a scanner implementation for one of my customers. So
Okay.
I remember that I saw a headline like um, I don't even I can't even recall how it was exactly, but um, we got a video from Eric Hogarth.
Okay.
He did a video on how to implement scanners. So I just
Yep.
went on his profile on Twitter, scrolled down till I found this video and watched this 10 minutes or 15 like it was. And now this is part of my solution.
Yes, Eric's videos are incredible, and the my challenge is if I just scroll through, and I typically don't have time. Like maybe I'll have 30 seconds while I'm rebooting or recompiling something, and I'll scroll through Twitter, and I'll see something interesting. I usually don't have time at that point. And if I don't
Mhm.
capture it right then, Twitter will refresh and I'll lose the tweet. It's really hard for me to go back and find something later. So I try and bookmark it. And I think the practice of making the list came from when I was first starting out and I made my BC resources list blog post. There was so much stuff, it was overwhelming. I couldn't keep track of it all. So I tried to just write down everything I could because these seemed like these gems. So when Eric posts a video, it's like, oh, wait, I don't have a use for that now, but like the barcode scanner, or he just did one on XML port. So I don't have a use for importing large XML objects or documents now, but I want to have a reminder of that. So I always try to bookmark that. So that's why, because otherwise I'll just lose it in the constant stream of information that's coming out. So a question came in from Twitch. The base source code's also available on the BC DVD. The idea to make a repo where all versions are committed is great. Is this already available?
No, it is not. For now, I made a alpha version maybe to talk about that I can talk with Microsoft about the idea, and I got the feedback that we can do this. We just need to think about how.
Okay.
So I will prepare a private GitHub repository is the next step where I can finish the work on it and make it working and fluently to look up things, catch some problems, and then I need to talk with Microsoft once again about how we can submit this to the community.
Okay, and I'm just going to pull up. So, if someone follows you on Twitter, is that the best way to hear about the progress of this?
Yeah,
Okay, so I'm
it
just
is.
going to try and show this. Let me see, screen 3. So, if I'd recommend going to Twitter, and here is Stefan's Twitter account, and he has a blog, stefanmaroń.wordpress.com, and so you can follow him on Twitter and catch up or keep up on the effort to get the source code into GitHub. Okay, and I think we're back. Okay, so next up on our list was acceptance test driven development, or less formally, automated test driven development. Have you had a chance to implement this and work on this and learn this?
Half and half maybe. Um, I bought the book,
Yep,
about this
the
topic.
book. Yep,
um, I worked through it and I was like, wow, this needs to be in every project I
yep,
do. The first thing to do is writing these scenarios and start with not starting with code directly, but scenarios and afterwards development. Like it is written in the book, I was super convinced.
yep.
And then I got back on to work in customer projects, and the reality is quite a bit different.
And so
Um,
what differences did you run into?
um, yeah, I try to develop in method code units like Waldo suggests, and I try to write a few tests for every of these method code units. But this is like a little bit turned around. So I have my code written, and afterwards I write the tests for now.
Okay.
Because this is something I can manage on my own. I don't need to have any consultant to define these scenarios and give it to me that I can start with tests first and afterwards start to develop. Um, but right now I'm with my colleagues also on the progress to switch this to define these scenarios first and afterwards development. And I got some attention of this. They are for now happy in theory, and we need to see
Okay.
in future projects how this is in reality looking like.
Okay. And for those who are not familiar, let me try switching over. This is the book we're referring to. And this is on Pact, is published by Pact Publishing, which publishes several other Business Central books. And this is by Luc Van Vliet. And it is automated testing in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. And I also have this book. I have attended Luke's training class. I think it's a six half day, six different session training class, and I believe he is offering that class again coming up soon. So, if you aren't familiar with this and you are doing Business Central development, you really, really need to at least read this book and be aware of it. It is an entire it, it's a very deep, deep domain of knowledge. I'd say it's not something you're going to pick up in a couple hours. It's an entire philosophy, a very different way of doing design development, and your DevOps pipeline. So
Yeah.
so
But before everybody is going to buy this book now, I believe Luke is working on some updates for
yes.
the current versions.
Yeah, I just saw his recent tweet or blog post, I forget, where he knows that there are some things that need to be updated and corrected because just of changes with BC and some errata, as he called it. But I guess he's having a challenge with the publisher because it's a lot of work to do a new version or a new edition.
Hmm.
So I guess that's one of the challenges of the traditional print model. So he's working on that, but it's still a good book, regardless of the any details that might be, 6, 12, 18 months old. The philosophy of what he's trying to explain, I think, is still relevant.
Absolutely. I even recommend this book to consultants to read the first chapters where is just the philosophy explained.
Yes.
And if code starts, they can close the book and lay it away.
Yep.
But these first chapters are quite important to everybody, I think.
And I did the exact same thing with my team, both myself, our developer, and our functional consultant or lead. Even though she is not a developer, we went through the first several chapters. I highlighted sections in the book. We discussed it so that we are all on board with the concept. Now,
Hmm.
like you,
Absolutely.
there are many challenges, right? So you need to get the code developed, you need to get the project done, you need to move forward, and it seems like this effort to do the design and the test-driven development might be a roadblock or an impediment or something that delays you. But in the end, it should save you time and save you a significant amount of headaches. But implementing that is a challenge.
I think you need to get over this um, block in mind, maybe to start with a time-consuming topic first,
Yep.
and don't be afraid that this project in general will be too much delayed because the time you need to spend first will save you time afterwards, I believe.
Yes, I think anyone, we may sound like religious converts after reading this book, but once you read the book and you understand the mechanics and the actual the metrics and the science and the studies that have been done, this is a widely used philosophy. Now, very interestingly, I searched. I don't know which terms I was using to search for on YouTube, and it was basically I searched for acceptance test driven development, and there's some very interesting conference talks on the topic. And one, I'll need to dig it up and make a blog post or a video about it separately. But a guy who's been doing this for years, many years, he talked about some of the cons, like the real world downsides and complications of trying to
Interesting.
implement this in an organization. And one of the points that he brought up was even if you are fully on board with this, you're a cheerleader for test driven development. What was happening is in his organization is they had vastly more code in their testing than they did in the actual product. And what they found was their testing became a bottleneck because it was so difficult for them to make new tests for new scenarios without breaking all sorts of other stuff that
Mm.
their test toolkit or their test project became this monstrosity. So rather than the product being a monstrosity, it was their entire test environment and test pipeline that became this massive pile of overhead. So he explained some of the challenges of maintaining that and how to balance the belief in automated testing versus kind of the pragmatics of maintaining that in a large project. But I don't do his presentation adequate service by trying to explain it. But there's some really interesting talks on YouTube about some of the cons of what might seem like a panacea of acceptance test-driven development. So anyway, I'd recommend checking those out. Just search for it on YouTube.
Yeah, I think on this topic, few people I talked with about this automated test, they taught me that it's quite difficult if you imagine that you want to test statistics maybe on general ledger entries or something like this. Then they tackled this problem with creating an article, an item in the in table, and every conditions on everything what you need to create an item, then maybe an sales order. Then they post the sales order, and afterwards they have general ledger entries which they can use for testing statistics. And
Right.
the major point in this book, which I took away, was that you don't need to create all this stuff in advance and run the post routine and everything.
Yes.
You just write plain the general ledger entry with everything you need, and you expect that the everything before, which you didn't do in this scenario, in this easy scenario, you expect to be tested by other tests.
Interesting. Yes, related to that, Luke does explain I think he calls them fixtures, test fixtures.
I
Is
don't
that the
remember.
test? So there's a term for it, and the concept is that, and in the Dynamics GP world, I had this challenge, right? In order to test a specific customization integration piece of code, I need to have test data. And oftentimes, getting that test data set up or your test environment set up was a major hassle. It's a lot of work. So if you have a fresh environment, getting everything configured, getting your test customers or items or orders or GL entries or whatever it is, you'd get that set up and you'd have your sacred test environment. And the challenge, well, many challenges with that, one of which is just replicating that in a new QA environment, for instance. You would have different test results if you tried to manually do that. So in this book, Luke explains what I believe are called test fixtures. And that is essentially you write test code to create your test data sets. So rather than trying to manually replicate that data or set up your configuration, you write code to do that. So you can wipe your environment, you can delete your Docker container, recreate a new one from scratch, and you know that your test code unit is going to reconfigure that environment, set up your test records, set up your test transactions that you can use your validation code to test against. So that was like, well, duh. I mean, it seems so obvious in hindsight, right? But I don't know that it's something I have regularly practiced in my development.
Yeah, so generating test data is the one part, but I really saw test functions which created everything from scratch. The items, the sales order, then they run the postcode unit and everything just to get the general ledger entry, one row
Right.
of data. And this was like a game changer. This opened my eyes, like, oh, why didn't I thought about this first? So you just write this one line of data which you need into the database. Don't care about validation. This wouldn't be possible with validation at all. So you just write it in there. Expect that this is the point where you start to test. Yeah.
Interesting.
The end result.
So you kind of bypass all the intermediate steps that you don't necessarily care about.
Yes.
All you care about is the end result in the GL.
Yeah. And then you start your test and you see if this runs. And everything before that, the GL entry is inserted correctly. This is different test functions which you don't care about in this moment.
And I think there's a similar concept, and I only learned the term through those YouTube videos that I watched about automated testing. They call them mocks. And so you, rather than say calling an active web service to test your code, you create a mock, which is just a simulated fake web service that always returns whatever static values you want. So you're not constantly having to call the credit card transaction processor or the sales tax validation or whatever external web service you're calling. You create these mocks, and it's a convenient and expedient way to simulate certain function calls. However, in this same video that I watched, and now I'm going to have to dig it up and do a blog post, he talks about some of the downside of mocks, and I forget what his point was, but he's like, mocks sound really good until you encounter this, and he explains what that downside is, and it's like, makes total sense. So while some of these approaches in the test-driven development make complete sense at the time, you need to consider some of the implications and potential downsides, to at least be aware of them so that you are prepared for some of those complications. But in general, the concept of automated test or acceptance test driven development, I always get that wrong, as you and I, having read the book, know, I don't see a way to do proper BC development without it. What do you think?
Not really. As soon as you get the automated test run in DevOps or GitLab or any kind of automation build pipeline, and you see directly after each change you do if every test is still running and passing, or if you have anything in any piece of code broken afterwards, then you realize that how valuable this is. I don't know how often I had tests and I changed something. I was like, I think the last time was some warning from Microsoft that I shouldn't use find, I should use find first. So I just went ahead, obviously changed it in two places and didn't care about it. Next day, I saw in my test results that I think 5 or 6 tests were failing. And I was like, what? I didn't change anything. I just fixed a few warnings ago and and pushed it. And this was one thing, and I didn't know whether I would ever find this bug without automated test. So I didn't only get the notification kind of thing that I saw that something is broken. I also could debug the test manually on my PC and see exactly where the error is coming from.
Yes, and so just that, it's like having your automated QA department every night scrubbing your code, checking for changes, mistakes, errors, whatever. And I don't see a way to develop for Business Central without it because of the release cycle. Right. So we know that Business Central, the AL language is still changing. They're making even minor changes. The implicit with, right? So that's the big one that we know is going to affect things. And so version 17 is out. That's October 2020 release. And so as these new releases, both the major releases twice a year and the point releases, I mean, if you have solutions out there for Business Central, without automated testing, the amount of manual effort required to try and figure out what has changed, what's broken, what you need to fix, I just don't see a practical way of doing it.
Especially because you don't even know anything is broken until your customer or somebody reports to you that there is a problem, and then most of the time it's too late already. Some data is broken inside BC and you need to not only fix the error, but fix the data in I don't know how many environments possibly. And with automated tests, you see that this is broken before it gets installed on site.
Yes, and I guess that goes back to the difference between on-prem versus SaaS. In the Dynamics GP world, and I'm assuming in the NAV world, the on-prem customer could control their upgrade cycle. So they knew that they were going to upgrade in March, and they would let the consultants know, and you'd have that time to plan, to test, and prepare for that upgrade. Well, now that we're in the SaaS world, we're on Microsoft's timeline. And so we need to be prepared for that, March and October, whatever those two release dates are. So when October comes around, I want to know 6 months in advance or as early as possible with those pre-releases or the insider builds. I want to know well before October, hey, here's what I need to fix. Here are the problems. Talk with the customer, make the changes, test, and prepare that release.
Absolutely. I don't know how many customers I saw already with a NAV version 15, 20 years old, and they never did an upgrade. So now we are in a different world, in a very different world.
Yep. And it is challenging. I mean, I empathize, but I think we have the tools. We're still learning and refining those tools, but the tools are available, but it requires learning on behalf of the partner, the developer, the ISV, the customer, whoever is doing the development. It is an investment. It is a learning curve, but I just don't see any other way.
Yeah, this also, I think, a mind change necessary, a change in mind, that if you think about SaaS customers and projects, you can't tackle them the same as you did 5 years ago with on-prem projects. This is you have problems, and the answer to this are the new tools we have now, like tests, Docker, and things like this.
Yes, and I'm coming from that on-prem world very much, where I guess to put it inelegantly, we were able to get away with not being as formal, as proper, as we didn't have the best practices in place necessarily for some projects. And I think we can't get away with that in the SaaS world. We need to have better practices, better skills, and from my perspective, it really requires that people step up to the more professional, or the I don't know what the term is, better practices overall.
Yeah, I think there are quite many of developers in NAV world which are quite good at their project. That they can do NAV projects like I would never be able to, but many of them are not. They didn't learn software development. They were consultants and started slowly to develop inside NAV. So the main topic they can do, what they are good at, is doing projects with customers, but the development is somehow the second important, if you know what I mean.
And
this needs to change, I think.
It also reminds me of in the GP world, many consultants, partners, developers were able to get by kind of knowing how to get something done. They'd hack out some code and it would work perfectly fine. It would even work for 10 years with minimal maintenance. But now it seems like even a partner who wants to do a few customer-specific per tenant extensions, to do it right, it feels, from my perspective, it feels like we need to be in the commercial software space. We need to be at the commercial software level with proper practices, proper DevOps pipelines, more like commercial product release practices that were never required back in the on-prem world. That's kind of what it feels like to me.
I remember when we first started with AL, and we were excited about this new language and Visual Studio Code and things like this. We showed it to one colleague, consultant of us, and his first question was like, yeah, and how do I make a field on a page visible in the live environment for the customer where he is on call with me, and I will just quickly change things like this. And we didn't have the in-page designer in this time, so we just answered, yeah, you don't.
Yep. Yes, it is not, you're not making real-time changes to production.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
There's the old joke, I don't always test my code, but when I do, I test it in production. And I've been there, right? So something gets released, and 30 minutes after release, you find some issue or some bug or whatever, and so you have to quickly push a new release to production. Um, yeah, we can't do that anymore. Well, we had some other topics in a list to discuss, but we're approaching an hour, so it went by pretty
Okay.
quickly. So I think we can wrap this one up, and I'm happy to do another one, and we can talk about these other items that we've have on our list. But thank you very much for joining me. Any other thoughts or closing thoughts you have?
Not really. Thank you for hosting this session. Quite interesting questions this time. Looking forward to our next topic, I think.
Excellent. And I'll just flash the put this slide back on. So we had talked about covering DevOps, which is an entire dimension. We touched on it a bit, and then we talked about best practices. And coming from the .NET Dynamics GP world of development, it seems like BC and AL have different ideas or different concepts and different best practices. So for me as an outsider, those some of those are odd and interesting and different than what I'm used to. And then I think we also briefly discussed the concept of code review and how do we make that happen just as a concept. So that's what we may cover in a subsequent session, and we'll probably come up with some other ideas as well. But awesome. Thank you very much for joining me on your what is today? Wednesday afternoon.
Wednesday,
Um,
yeah.
so have a good day, have a good week, and we'll schedule another one soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. And let me wrap this up here. Have a good day, everyone.